Okay, so now that we've gotten your feet wet, and you've given your first speech, and you're in the process of learning more about public speaking and researching different types of speeches, let's look at some ways that you can enhance your audience connection. One of the book suggests that there are four strategies that can enhance your connection with the audience. And page 324 is quoted as saying, "At the heart of creating understanding is the ability to relate information to listeners. Just because an idea has been around for centuries doesn't mean that it is easy to understand or that an audience understand the relevance of the information in their own lives." And that's the issue that we face anytime that we present information to an audience, is that we don't know the audience's level of engagement or familiarity with the content that we are trying to present to them. So we have to understand that sometimes the audience may know nothing or very little about the topic that we're presenting about. Or even if they do have knowledge about the topic, they may lack an understanding of the importance or relevance of that topic, that information in their own lives. It's our job as an effective presenter to emphasize those two things. For instance, let's take a look at this. Now, if that scared you, if you're like me and you're not a math person, just looking at that visual can cause a little bit of panic. But that is actually the calculation for gravity, Newton's law of gravity, right? So if you get up there and you pop that up into a visual in your presentation, you're probably going to lose a lot of people, right? Or if you start talking about gravity in general, maybe you're giving an informative speech about gravity. What is gravity? The theory of gravity. People have a basic understanding of gravity, but they lack a real deep understanding of the relevance and how it's applicable in our day-to-day lives, right? So you wouldn't approach discussing gravity with this computation, right? You're not going to get up there and say, this is gravity and this is why it's important, right? You're going to show it in a simpler method, right? We all think back to our understanding of gravity and Newton's law of gravity, of the story of him sitting under the apple tree, right? And the apple falls from the tree and it falls down with a certain amount of force and it hits him on the head. And Newton identified that all apples fell with that same level of that same direction. They all fell down. Apples don't fall up. They don't float up in the sky. They fall down. That there was some force that was pulling those objects to the ground. And he then later identified that as Newton's law of gravity. So find ways. The first way to enhance your connection with the audience is to put it in simpler levels of understanding, especially if you're talking about complex topics like Newton's law of gravity. Don't put a computation up there. Instead, put something that's much simpler and easier for the audience to understand. So there are four key strategies there that can help us do that. And the first is just to ensure that we speak with clarity, right? So this idea that we need to express our ideas so that the listener understands the intended message accurately. Right? So just simply speaking with a clear voice and making sure that it is clear what we are actually trying to say. So we need to be clear, we need to be direct, and we need to be specific. Don't have the audience, the listeners, trying to piece the puzzle pieces together and say, oh, well, is this what they're talking about? Be clear, be direct, and be specific. One of the things that we need to avoid is our use of jargon. Now, we use jargon in our day-to-day lives. It just makes it simpler, right? Every organization has their own jargon and their own language that means something. For instance, most of you have probably heard of the NAACP, right? Think about it. What does the NAACP stand for? What's it mean to you? Many of us will know it as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, right? The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. But what would you do if someone got up in an audience or got up in front of the audience to give a speech and they said, today I'm going to tell you that the NAACP really isn't a useful organization because you can find a good Chihuahua puppy down at the local pound, one that needs adoption. You might be a little bit confused because what you thought the NAACP was is not what they are talking about, right? There is a National Association for the Adoption of Chihuahua Puppies, So we need to be clear. We don't need to use jargon because that can be very, very bad in terms of our audience's perception of what it is that we're actually trying to say. As a result, we also need to use visuals if at all possible. Right now, that's a little bit difficult in an online public speaking class, but you can use visuals. You can print things out. You can use actual props. Do your best to actually use visuals and things that will enhance your audience's understanding of material. The second is to use standard principles of learning. Right? I think this little picture is pretty accurate, right? There's all of these things that we want to say. There's all of these things that they're interested in, but there is very little overlap in terms of things that are actually relevant. Find that space between the two, and you'll have a very connected and engaged audience, and you'll also be able to say what it is that you want to say. So you need to understand the needs and interest of the audience, and part of that is the composite and the makeup of the audience. Again, for our class, it's generally traditionally aged college students, and that is a very specific audience, right? If you're giving speeches professionally in the future, that audience may look a little bit different. If you're giving speeches in front of clubs and organizations, you need to understand who is in the audience and what interest do those audience members have. Now, we also need to actively involve the audience members in the process of the speech. Again, this is difficult in an online class because in a face-to-face setting, I could call you by name. I could say, Sam, can you tell me what you know about active listening? Or I could say, how many of you, by show of hands, have ever been to a football game? And as an audience member, you could raise your hand. Right? So there are ways to actively involve the audience and force the audience in some ways to be involved in your presentation if you're doing that face-to-face. And so, again, much harder to do in an online setting because you can't call on members of the class because your speeches aren't given in a live format. But what you can do is you can involve the audience members that you have in front of you, right? So whoever is in the audience that you have, you can utilize them in ways that make your connection to them more direct. So we also need to connect our listeners' life experiences with the new information, right? What that means is the information needs to make sense to them, right? Their life experiences, we need to connect that to the new information. So that's what we call the so what question. So you're giving us all of this information, and that's great, but why is it important? Right? Why is that information important? How is it going to impact their life? How is it going to be real to them? And that goes along with this final statement of that we need to make new information relevant to their needs and to their busy lives. And we can do that by helping them solve a problem. Right? So especially if you're doing a demonstration speech, which we'll be doing later on, or you're talking about persuasion and we're doing a persuasive speech, you can present your information in a way that says, my goal today is to present this information to you, and as a result of that, I hope that you walk away with a better understanding of the topic, as well as realizing that there is an easy way that we can approach XYZ. Help them solve a problem if you can. That will always make your audience more connected to you. We also need to clarify unfamiliar ideas. Your book uses this example, and I actually think it's a pretty good example of the Milky Way galaxy, right? To say that the Milky Way galaxy is large, well, that's an understatement. If you're talking about our solar system in relationship to the Milky Way galaxy, you can say, well, our solar system is actually pretty small if you compare it to the Milky Way galaxy as a whole. And you could show a picture of the Milky Way galaxy. Well, that's a good start, but your audience really isn't going to understand that idea. They're not going to be able to visualize that because, honestly, we really don't understand in our day-to-day lives. We don't deal with things like the size of the Milky Way galaxy or our solar system. So instead, you could say if you were comparing the solar system to the Milky Way galaxy, imagine the Milky Way galaxy is the size of the geographic United States. Right? And you could show a picture of a map of the geographic United States. Now imagine that our solar system within the Milky Way galaxy is only would be the size of a coffee cup, a single coffee cup on the map. of the United States. That's how small our solar system is in relation to the Milky Way galaxy. Right? Now that's something that people can visualize. That's something that that will help us understand, that will help wow us, that we can see, wow, you know what? Our solar system really is a speck of dust within the terms of the Milky Way galaxy and beyond. Right? So if you're going to use unfamiliar ideas, or if you're going to talk about grand topics or things that are hard for people to visualize, help us, show us. Right? If you're counting people or numbers, right? Put it into equations and things that people understand, right? That would be the equivalent of Texas A&M's football stadium filled 15 times over, right? So give us numbers that allow us to visualize the scope of the numbers that you're representing. Use analogies like the one we just did with the Milky Way galaxy. Use vivid descriptions or word pictures if you can. Right? The key is you don't want your audience looking like this. You don't want your audience bored, zoned out, asleep. You want your audience engaged. You want them actively listening. You want them participating. Because remember, if we go back and we think about public speaking and public speaking anxiety, the more engaged we are with our audience, the more connected we feel with our audience, the more likely we are to feel that we're doing well. And if we feel we're doing well, our speech anxiety levels will fall. Now, we also can reach out to our audience in multiple ways, and we can do this by appealing to multiple learning styles. So there are 3 general types of learners. There are visual learners, there are auditory learners, and there are what we call kinesthetic learners, or kinesics. And what that means is that visual learners, they like to learn, or they learn best through graphs and illustrations, through PowerPoints, videos, pictures, things like that. They are visual learners. They like to see it. There are auditory learners, and those are people that like to watch and listen to videos. They like to listen to podcasts. They might like group discussions or oral presentations where they can hear other people's perspectives, one-on-one conversations. They learn best in those environments. And then lastly, there are people who learn best with hands-on activities. Those are people that like to sit in on the meetings. They like demonstrations. They like people to show them how to do something, and then they are more likely to be able to do that themselves. So these people are very good note takers. They like to role play. That helps them with their learning. If you think about this class, I try as a professor to make sure that this class has a nice range of ways that you can learn, right? Through our visual PowerPoints that you're watching today, to listening to this, right? Instead of just having visual PowerPoints that go along with the text, you can watch this video, you can listen to it, you can read the text if you're a visual learner. And the hands-on activity is, of course, you guys actually out there giving your speeches and then providing feedback to you and getting feedback from other students in the class, and then you learn from that and hopefully become a better speaker. So hopefully you can see the range of activities and approaches to learning that I have in this class, and maybe that can help you understand the importance of these things with an audience. So how do you do this with an audience? Well, right, you have a mix. You have maybe pictures, or maybe you have a handout. Right, you call directly on people. You get the audience to be involved, so you can reach out to these various styles of learning, and the best approaches are going to have a nice mix between them. So there are ways, remember, to get your audience more engaged, and that's probably the most difficult thing that we can do. Right? Remember, there are 5 things that people think about on a regular basis, and they're not speeches. Right? Hot guys, hot girls, hamburgers, Christmas gnomes, beer, and bathrooms. Right? Those are the things people think about. We're busy people. We have a lot going on. So how are you going to engage your audience in meaningful ways that keep them involved? Right? So hopefully highlighting some of the things we've discussed today can help you do that.